Last time on DataBard, we put SQL in a box, identifying that SQL for the most part is constrained to the scope of a workspace as far as what it can or cannot see. But today, we're actually breaking open that box by asking this question. Spark workloads have typically been constrained to lakehouses, but are they really constrained to the lakehouses alone? We answer that question today on today's chapter of DataBard. DataBard, 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 hoi, hoi, hoi. Hi there, my name is DataBard, trying to help the data community be more efficient in the work that you do day in and day out as a developer. I thank you for clicking on the video, but this video is only helpful if either you learn something or if the community learns that this video exists. How can we help with that second part? Let's help the YouTube algorithm, shall we? Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and let the people in your community know that this channel exists to help you be more efficient. Alright, enough of that, let's get into the demo. Now, what I'm about to show you here, you'll have access to additional resources two ways. One, this script is available out on my GitHub repository, link in the description of this video to get to that. Second thing I'll share is a link to the documentation that calls out this process and specifically how it works. Now, to be clear, I had tried this for months. According to the documentation that I showed you, it was only until recently, actually when I was at Past Summit, that one of the attendees of my session, Chris, thank you for this, Chris, told me that this was finally working, and I had to test it out, and sure enough, it does. Super excited for this for those who like working with Spark, but don't like the fact that you can't get connected to lakehouses. Has not really been fun, right? And what I talk about here is I've got my PySpark notebook here, and I can go over here and I can say I want to add things in new lakehouse. I don't want to add in a new lakehouse. I want to add in an existing warehouse, but you only have the options for lakehouses. Clicky, draggy, droppy experience doesn't give you the chance to connect to warehouses. So that means all hope is lost, right? No. Well, actually, yes. It just takes a little bit more work. Let me show you how. If you're like me, the first places that you went is we can do Spark SQL. It's a warehouse experience, so I just need to write a simple select statement against that. When we run that, what happens? An error message is what happens, saying that it can't find what it is we're looking for. Table or view, not found. But again, this syntax only works if you've got this as your default for the notebook, which means it's the default lakehouse. We can't do default warehouses for Spark notebooks. That doesn't work, so we need a new solution. According to the documentation, there is in fact a solution. It requires a little bit of additional configuration. First of all, what it does require is it requires us to bring in this com.microsoft.spark.fabric library. I tried doing this without bringing in this library, and you can still define the code. It won't run. It won't really tell you why it won't run, and you don't necessarily need to call anything specific to this library, at least from the way that it looks. But this library is necessary. Make sure you import that in. Second thing is, for your warehouse, you'll need to identify its name and its SQL endpoint, that big GUID value .datawarehouse.fabric.microsoft.com. You're going to need that whole value, and I would typically put them in as two separate variables to populate that. Once you do, it's a single Spark configuration. So I'm not really defining a variable. This is where I'm configuring the Spark environment, and this library gives me the ability to define a SQL endpoint configuration within the Spark environment. I call it spark.datawarehouse. And here I'm referencing my variable above, .SQL endpoint, and then here's a second variable. I'm giving it that actual SQL endpoint. What does that allow? It gives us a slightly different syntax, but it gives us what we're looking for. This looks similar to what we've defined in other cases, Spark, but instead of doing .sql, we'll do .read and then .synapse SQL, and then using a three-part identifier, warehouse, schema, and table, I can now query that table and bring it into a data frame in my Spark environment. And this works for both warehouse and lakehouse if I want to go that route. Yay! We can get to the tables in a warehouse from Spark, something I didn't think was previously possible. Really cool that we can do that with just a simple three-part identifier and a slight syntax change. But obviously this can't be where the conversation ends, because this is just a flat, I'm pulling in the entirety of the table. What if I want to do a subset? I tried this a couple of ways, and at least in current state, I could not get it to work. I tried at least syntax with Synapse SQL, passing in a SQL statement similar to what we would do with Spark.SQL. Doesn't seem to like that. Also noticing that this comes from Synapse, I went to take a look at the Synapse documentation, and Synapse does have this concept of constants, which you can define constants, essentially the same as a Spark configuration, but the constants can store specific values related to it. And in the Synapse documentation, there is an option here for constants.query where you can pass in a query value. I tried it here in the Fabric environment, and unfortunately, that's a no-go. This code does not work. And at least there's a quick confirmation. Yep, it does not like this particular constant. Actually, it doesn't like it because I comment that out. Let's fix that. We'll run this section here, and this is where it gives us the constants have no attribute query. I took a look through the constants, didn't seem like there was an option there for the query option, so unfortunately, this seems to be a dead end. Behold, I am Sven, and I am skeptical. DataBard has you believing that in fact, all you can do is full pulls of data tables in a Fabric warehouse. Really, did he even take any time to research this? Seriously, sometimes I wonder for this man's brain. But in any case, the short answer is no, he is wrong. You can get subsections of the tables. How, you ask? DataBard is looking at it from the wrong angle. While you might look at this as a way of saying PySpark enables me to do SQL things, it does enable you to do SQL things, but in the end, it is still PySpark. And that means we need to do things not the SQL way, but the PySpark way. To solve DataBard's problem, we don't need to incorporate more SQL, we need to incorporate more PySpark. Look at this demo. He just comes in, writing all these fancy SQL statements, and trying to do these configurations, but that's still trying to do things the SQL way in PySpark. You need to do things the PySpark way in PySpark. Instead of passing in a query, you define your PySpark statement as if it were a query. To wit, you can still query Synapse SQL the same way that you would before. But, like you can with other PySpark situations where you're building a Spark data frame, you can perform additional statements like you can with SQL, such as a filter function and a select function. And given the way the Spark engine works, it handles it the same way as a SQL statement as a single transaction, and in doing so, you're able to do the same thing, such as in this query, which is actually filtering the date dimension down to 2015 and returning a subset of columns. Look at that, you can do exactly what you wanted to do in SQL, but you're doing it with PySpark. So sorry to rain on your parade, DataBard, but in this case, the Viking needed to invade to tell you, you are wrong. You can get subsets of your Fabric warehouse tables by filtering down your dataset the same way you would other datasets, from other data sources. Like, this is the same thing we do with Spark data frames otherwise. And so, Data Bard, this skeptic is saying, is that really your best answer? Alright, let's let him finish his deal because he actually has a couple of cool things to show you. Come on. Now, there's one super cool nuance about this that I want to make sure I cover here. Notice here that I'm calling to a lakehouse and a warehouse data bar demo, lakehouse data bar demo. But look at my tabs at the top. My notebook here is sitting in my data bar workspace, but the lakehouse and warehouse that I'm accessing are in my workspace. They're in a separate workspace. Yes, that's right. When we do it this way, a simple Spark configuration setting allows us to connect to the SQL Analytics endpoint for both warehouses and lakehouses that exist in a different workspace. It doesn't require any of the additional things that I've had in previous videos about Senpai and all of those other things. This gives us a way to access it directly with just something as simple as a configuration setting. That is pretty fantastic compared to what you have been able to do with this experience previously. Here's another fun, interesting part of this. By doing this as a Spark configuration here, not only do we have an easy way of reading from Fabric warehouses, but can we write to Fabric warehouses using this? Yes, yes, very yes, you can. A very simple adjustment to our data frame call, df.write.mode overwrite, same as we would have done otherwise if we were doing this to a lakehouse, but then we use this .synapse SQL again with a 3-part identifier, and we can successfully get this to write to a warehouse storage as well. And to be clear here, it is throwing an error right now. What's the error it's throwing though? Let's bring that up. It's not the warehouse write, it's the lakehouse write, which again shouldn't be a surprise because what is it hitting on the lakehouse? The SQL Analytics endpoint. What is the SQL Analytics endpoint for the lakehouse? Read only, so we can't write this way. For those of you, including myself, who felt like I want to do Spark things and the only thing I can interact with is a lakehouse, not the case anymore. Now we can connect to warehouses just the same as we do to lakehouses with just a little bit of a configuration change. Pretty simple, pretty cool, pretty helpful. Brings us to the end of today's video. Thank you for watching, and if this video helps you with your Spark experience in Microsoft Fabric, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and let others know that this channel is about helping developers be more efficient with solutions like Microsoft Fabric. Have any follow-up questions? Hit me up in the comments, let me know what your thoughts are, and I'll do my best to answer those questions in future videos. For now, I'm Data Bard, and I'll see you in the next chapter. Today's chapter may be done, but that doesn't mean the story is over. If you are looking to work with someone like me to improve your data strategy or implementation, go to bakertilly.com/digital, fill out the contact form, and let's see how we can help you take the next step on your data journey.